WWNN.
The opinions expressed on the following sponsored program are strictly those of the host, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of this station, its staff, management, or sponsors. Welcome to the CareGiver reality show with your hosts, David Levy and Paul Vadiato, who bring you more than a combined 25 years of practical experience, helping thousands of family caregivers, helping them find solutions to the challenges and frustrations presented by this important responsibility. So if you are in the position of caring for a spouse or a parent, a loved one who is no longer able to care for themselves, or if you know someone who is, this hour will be worth the listening. Now, let's tune into today's edition of CareGiver Reality with your hosts, David Levy and Paul Vadiato.
Good evening, South Florida, America, and the world. You're tuned into the CareGiver Reality Hour, and you're listening to us on either caregiverreality.com live show. You're on WWNN locally, 1470, drive time on your radio, iHeart, anywhere in the world. AMP Squared TV, AMP.2.TV, and you can see us live there, and a myriad of other places that our producer manages to put us in this social network world that we're in. Tonight we have a very special guest. We're reciprocating. A couple of weeks ago Paul and I were on his show. It's Scott Greenberg from Comfort Care, one of the brightest people I know in the industry. And his book just won an Indie Award. He was up at the Javits Center in New York for a book signing and a big book show, and he was just telling us before the show started that it was like the car show at the Javits Center in New York. I mean, it was just loaded, and there he was getting right a cramp because he was signing books and giving them away, and people were all over him to find out more about what he wrote. And since then, he's been getting calls from people that want him to speak, that want to interview him. And so it's great to have him here. Scott, we'll get to you in a few minutes. And but he's sitting over there kind of grumpy and wearing his red shirt. We got a number of things to discuss, and we'll be getting to them in just a moment. I do want to say that we certainly had a lot of responses after the fact to Barry Sinrod, who was on last week. If you recall, he is the gentleman whose wife has terminal Parkinson's. She's in hospice, and he has been having such a difficult time trying to understand why, with his advanced directives and their clear understanding, that he cannot get somebody to euthanize her, assisted suicide, whatever you want to call it, to put her out of her misery sooner. It has been a real lightning rod discussion. We touched upon it a couple of weeks back with Vicki Kind, who is the bioethicist. And so I had dinner with Barry on Sunday. I spoke to him a little while ago, and the head of hospice says it's not weeks any longer, it's days. And all I can say is that he has certainly crusaded on behalf of his wife and the cause of not having to have this happen to others. In this country, we're not kind of ready for it. But if you stop and think that if your Cocker Spaniel tomorrow came down with cancer, you could take him to the vet, or she to the vet, and if it was serious enough, they could put him to sleep at that time out of his misery. He would not have to go back home, go into a doggy nursing home, or try and go into dog hospice. And I'm not making light of it, but we certainly understand how to treat our animals maybe a little bit better than we do ourselves for end of life. It's a controversial topic. It's being debated in places like the state of Washington and Oregon. It has certainly advanced in countries like the Netherlands. And it's a conversation in an aging world that we're all going to have to face, because do we have enough people to be able to handle end of life, both from a facility perspective and even whether or not, and that's one of the things I'm going to be discussing with Scott, not specifically hospice, but do we have enough people in an aging society to take care of all of the needs that are going home? whether it's hospice, home care, other kinds of assistance. We, as I've said over and over again, the formal healthcare system has dumped on the unpaid family caregiver everything that they choose not to do and not to recognize, and done without any training, and done without the thought of, except for post-acute home care, when you come out of the hospital for some reason that you've been in at least 72 hours and qualify for home care. Nobody seems to be looking and understanding the needs of the caregiver. One thing I think you've realized in listening to this show, that Caregiver Reality is all about you, the unpaid family caregiver, what you're going through, what you will be going through. There are 50 to 60 million of you, and certainly you cannot be ignored or overlooked. And no matter how much the system would like to sweep it all under your rug, we're coming to a point where, and I said it last week, if 2 million active caregivers tomorrow got up and said, I can't do this any longer, I quit, you need to take care of the healthcare system, we'd roll the healthcare system over. There's just no way that they can do what you're doing, and they expect you to do more of it, more complicated, more medically complicated, and the system is not getting any easier, so that the practical problem solving that takes up almost 85% of caregiving is on your shoulders, and every day you're reinventing the wheel. That's why we're here. If there is something to be known about caregiving, we will be the first to tell you. We are the front line of caregiving. We support the caregiver. If you want to speak to us, we're at 1-888-565-1470. We'll be happy to take your call. You can also leave us a message at info@caregiverreality.com, or david@caregiverreality.com, or paul@caregiverreality.com, and we will do our best to answer your questions and get back to you in a timely manner, so that maybe we can help allay a little bit of some of the things that you're going through, because as you know, Paul and I are both family caregivers, and we start the show off with, Paul, how was your week in caregiving?
David, I thought you forgot I was here. I didn't even get a chance to say hello. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the program. Thank you for asking. Boy, I tell you, this was a week of just being perplexed and being frustrated. We've had a very difficult time with some old problems, new ones appearing. I think we've just about visited every specialist that's in town. We've gone through just about every test, and the elusive butterfly of finding out what exactly is going on with Debbie's lupus and the symptoms that she's showing just seems to be beyond our grasp right now, and we're both feeling kind of very frustrated and a little bit of we don't know where to go next. So, as many of you caregivers know, not an easy job.
No, it isn't, and with a disease as difficult as lupus, and you know, you and I have been sending each other emails that have information about lupus attached to them.
Sure.
More and more we're learning that it is so complicated. When you get into the immune system, your ability to fight off things, even though there was a very interesting breakthrough for mice, that they were able to use mice that had cancer and inject them with their own stem cells, which were able to join the immune system and fight that cancer. I mean, it's like I've said before, we have the healthiest mice and glowworms in the world, and none of them will have dementia in another 5 years, because we've all taken care of the rodent population's dementia issues. Hopefully that'll translate out into more and better things for we as humans, but it's slow, and then all of that medical testing and all of those requirements from the FDA certainly put a distance between what mice get.
As they should.
Yeah, I mean, we need to do it right, but it's very frustrating for people like you and Debbie, and for others that have, you know, exotic diseases for which they do have unproven, or let's say untested medications that seem to be at the forefront, And there's been a lot of discussion that if you're suffering from a terminal illness and you're going to be dying from it anyway, in a short period of time, what would be so terrible about being somebody who was willing to take that experimental drug to see how it might work? Yes, we don't have double-blind studies and controls and all of those kinds of issues, but certainly when you get to end of life and you have people that feel very strongly about trying to make every day count, and I won't say grasping at straws, but it would seem logical that the FDA and the drug companies might at some point begin to make an exception just to see how their drugs work, even though it's not in a 3-phase controlled study. I do want to make mention of one thing and remind you all, 1-888-565-1470. You can talk to Paul, you can talk to David, and very soon you can talk to Scott. And Scott's probably one of the most knowledgeable people about the home health care industry that I know, and we asked him to come on. He was very gracious to come on because, as I said, one of the things with everything going home health care, whether you're looking for an aide, a companion, a home health aide, or a certified nursing aide, or even above that, although they're very tough to find, you got to know what you're doing. You have to know who to turn to, and there's probably nobody that is more involved and aware than Scott is, and he is the owner, president, and CEO of Comfort Care here in the Palm Beaches. And you in Martin County now?
I am.
And in Martin County, and he does a phenomenal job. Whenever I find that I need assistance with one of my clients, that's the first number I call. Actually, I give them Scott's cell phone so he can be pestered at all hours of the day and night, and he has never failed me.
Thank
If
you.
somebody calls, he picks up the phone and he does what he has to do. Want to give a quick shout out tonight to the Senior Citizens Bureau. Many of you may not have heard of them. They're about 600,000 strong. They're in a number of places around the country, but they are headquartered out of Houston, Texas. Their president is a woman I've been dealing with for a while by the name of Ashiva Phillips. She's a very bright woman. She has really steered the organization into doing some wonderful things. It's difficult when we use words like elderly or senior citizens, but I think in this particular case we're probably talking in the same category that AARP is, even though we don't want to recognize it. But you know, they're starting with age 50 and up, and so does the Senior Citizens Bureau. I'll be telling you more about it. I've been on their board for a number of years, and I have been helping them negotiate a package of benefits that they will be offering their members and new members in the near future, and it's something that we'll keep you apprised of, because it doesn't make a difference where you are in the country. You can join, and it's a very worthwhile organization. Anyway, Paul, back to you. I know you had a bunch of things to talk about, and I'm going to keep my mouth shut now. No reading.
Yeah, no reading. Just a couple of things that I came across during the week from the SCAN Foundation, which is a not-for-profit out of California, very much involved in caregiving, and particularly the funding of caregiving. And they came out with a report specifically dealing with perspectives on aging and the relationship of caregiver skills, emotional bond, and the safety, and how that wraps around comfort levels and satisfaction with long-term care. And as they went through their research, they came across three important parts that brought this together. First, what determined the satisfaction of the one being cared for was the skill sets of the caregiver. And that's what we've been about right from day one, is making the caregiver a better caregiver by giving them the tools to do that. The trust in their caregiver. Is this somebody that they can rely upon? And it made no difference if it was somebody who was within the family or somebody who was brought in as hired to be that caregiver, the trust that they had in that caregiver, and lastly, it was the relationship between these various caregivers that made a tremendous difference.
Explain a little more about what you mean. You mean between the family
caregiver and the hired caregiver. Oftentimes there was conflict that would come up between the two, or the one who was being cared for, the patient, was trying to drive a wedge between them and asking one to do something, and it really was the province of the other. So it really came down to defining roles, creating communication between them, having them feel that they are physically and emotionally safe in that environment, and that bond then transfers into that paid caregiver, and there was a lot of comfort for the family. So it was a very interesting report, and it's available on their website, scanfoundation.org. You might want to take a few minutes and take a look at it, and we'll make a link available on our website.
You know, and one of the things when we talk about skills more and more are clinical skills, because hospitals and other facilities are discharging people sicker and quicker and expecting the caregiver to pick up the slack. And so our skills are not only that 15% of clinical that we mentioned, but also that other 85% of practical problem solving is how are you going to do it, what are you going to do, how do you prioritize it, what's your plan, what happens if A doesn't work, where does B come from. And Scott, when you get a phone call, when I send you a caregiver that's in need of your services, what's the first thing you do besides say hello on the telephone?
Well, we try to get a sense of what it is we're going to be needing to deal with. We try to get a sense of what the situation is, how critical is it, who are we talking about. You know, particularly in the area of Alzheimer's disease, if you've met one person with Alzheimer's, you've met one person with Alzheimer's. So every case is unique and it is different. So I think we try to ask meaningful questions. We try to qualify what we're looking for. Now, of course, circumstances determine our reaction. If it's an immediate need, if I need somebody there in an hour, it's kind of the first person who can go goes until we get everything under control. But typically that's not the case. And so we try to get a sense of personality. Most times, myself or somebody else in my organization will go to the house, we'll meet the family, we'll assess the living arrangements, the family dynamic, the severity of the need, and then we'll try to come back and work on finding the right caregiver for the person that we're going to see.
So it's not necessarily the first one in the door that becomes the longer-term caregiver.
No, not necessarily. I say unless you're me, you rarely marry the first person you dated. I happen to be the exception. So it's not unusual for us to send a caregiver to someone's house with all good intention, and yet for whatever reason it doesn't work out, particularly because we live, particularly here in Florida, it's not just the Sunshine State, it's the denial state. So everybody believes what they think is happening is what's happening, as opposed to what is happening is happening. So oftentimes it may take a second time. Now, we try to minimize that, and we don't have an awful lot of difficulty in getting the right caregiver.
Well, I know that there's been a lot of folks that you have put in with caregivers and loved ones that I've sent to you, and I've watched many times the care recipient doesn't like the caregiver for reasons that make absolutely no sense. And you really have to be very clever, because in most cases, because of your knowledge, and that of the caregiver as well.
Right.
They really are the right person. It's just that most people are not as used to having somebody else in their home providing a level of care, because everybody still reverts back to when things were a lot easier. You know, even if you broke your arm, it would be in a cast, you'd come home, you'd do whatever, you caught the flu, it was 10 days, chicken soup and a magazine, and you were better. Long-term care and the provisions for it are a very different animal.
So the first chapter of my book is called "I'm Okay, I Can Do It Myself."
And please give the name of your book.
oh my God, I'm getting older, and so is my mom. Thank you for asking. But the first chapter is just on this subject, because it is every house we get involved with, you and me alike. So everybody, I said the land of denial. I warn everybody, particularly families, not so much the person in need of care, but the families, is it always begins with, I'm okay, I don't need any help, I don't want any help, leave me alone, I can do it myself. That is day one in every home. Not every home, but in most homes. That migrates into, okay, I'll accept help if you insist, but I will not be happy with it. And I will make everybody's life miserable for a while. And then about 2 weeks or maybe less, it gets in, maybe this isn't so bad after all. All right? And then the final stage is, how did I ever live without this? So you're right, there is an evolution to the caregiving process. There first has to become a recognition that somebody might in fact need care.
Right.
That's not easy to come to. But once that decision is made, if you find the right caregiver, one who's dedicated, committed, caring, attentive,
Trained,
all of the above.
that's like a good wife.
Yeah, my wife spent a lot of time, as you know, caring for me recently, and
Right.
She has said next time I'm on my own. But anyway, she, once you find that match, look, I describe this quite simply. People think that accepting help is the beginning of the end of their independence. Nothing could be further from the truth. Accepting help is the beginning of the restoration of your independence. Because typically when somebody is in such need that they need the help from somebody like myself, they're not bathing as well as they used to, they're not cleaning the house as well as they used to, they're not eating as well as they used to. I walk into homes, how often are you showering? Well, I don't sweat anymore. It's like you get to be 80, you don't sweat.
I know.
How often, when was the last time you changed the linen? Well, I don't sweat, so I don't change it as often. So the point is that they're carrying cereal boxes home to eat because they can't carry the cans of food or the heavy meat. They can't carry heavy things home. So they're not eating as well. Their hygiene is suffering. Their diet is suffering. They can't get to see the people that they used to see because they can't get out, they can't get organized. So
It sounds
accepting
like
help brings
not
them
only
to
activities of daily living,
Right.
all right, but also the general welfare of things that we always did like you said, dirty sheets, everybody has gone through a period
Right.
of time where their mother would yell at them, get upstairs and take a shower.
Right.
But this is a little more of a regimentation that comes about when you are self-guiding your own health care.
Right.
All right.
Scott, a question for you. Many of our listeners that are driving home right now, they have mom or dad who really needs to have that help in the house. And as you say, it is the land of denial. What do you say to these boomers who are so worried about their parents, and their parents are so resistant about having that help in, and in some cases they don't even live here?
Right. Again, a very common situation. So let's begin with the premise that there's no law against making stupid decisions. So if somebody absolutely refuses to accept help, there is nothing, unless they're endangering themselves, in which case you get into much more serious situations like APS and stuff,
Right.
which you don't need to do. But I think what you need to look for is a trusted friend, a trusted advisor. You need to look for somebody like yourselves, all right, that are involved with clients. You need to look for somebody. You need to, if you're the child trying to talk to mom, you need to make this less about you and more about them. You need to try to talk about it in terms of something that they will understand. If it's still a husband and wife, if it's still a couple, sometimes the way in is making believe that the care is for the other spouse. All right, and that's a big help. So it again depends on the circumstances, but there are ways to do it, and I think you can begin with 4 hours a day, 3 days a week, instead of hitting somebody 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, if that's what's necessary.
It's kind of like new shoes; you get a
Right.
little opportunity to break them
Break 'em
in.
in,
For
precisely.
those of our listeners, Scott mentioned APS. In case you don't know what that is, that's Adult Protective Services. It's an agency here in Florida, and also works out of the ombudsman at the area agencies on aging. And if you think that you've got an elder abuse situation going on with somebody that you know, and you don't want to directly get involved, but it seems to be serious, you can dial either 911 or the 211 hotline and say that somebody needs some assistance, and they'll connect you with Adult Protective Services. You don't necessarily have to give your name. It's not like TIPS hotline, but they will go and investigate, and if they find that an elder is in an abusive or a dangerous situation, they will step in.
And you can also call, if you think it's an abusive situation, 1-800-96-ABUSE in Florida. But around the country, it might be called DCF, Department of Children and Family. It could be called, I'm sure everywhere
Right.
around the world.
But all you need to do
has
is either dial 911
Right.
or 211, and
Right.
that will normally link you up with the services that are available
Right.
in your area. And for those of you in very rural areas, and we do broadcast to a lot of remote places, some of these things just may not be immediately available to you, but don't give up. Even if you can contact an organization that is engaged in adult protective services, and even if you can't get there, they may have suggestions for you on what you can do in the meantime, as well as calling 911 to see what the police department. But you know, we had an article we had on, I was reading a couple months back about people that really live in the rural areas, and it's 80 miles into town and back, and the police station and the hospital may be one of the rural hospitals in the rural hospital system, and you may just not have those assets available to you, but you need to at least think about who it is that you can contact to help you, guide you through a situation like that.
Just to carry Scott's point a little bit further, if I may, it's not only if that person is a danger to themselves, if they are a danger to you, then that's a 911 call.
Yeah.
It's not a think about it or check with other family members. You have to take care of yourself, and don't assume everything is going to be okay, or the knife that your loved one just picked up in that moment is going to get put back into the proper drawer.
A couple of years ago, I had that situation where I was with both the caregiver and the caregiver's father, and he did not like what she had to say about how they were going to be taking care of his situation. And he walked up to her. I didn't know what he was going to do. The first thing he did was give her a roundhouse punch, and she went down. And as I was reaching to kind of stop that from happening, there was a steak knife on the table, and he was about to stab her or me. And fortunately, he wasn't so big that I couldn't get him in a Heimlich type, maneuver and get him on the floor and sit on him until 911 showed up. But it came out of the clear blue. Obviously, we never gave a second thought because we'd never had an incident like that with him, but something just, snapped. I see by the clock on the wall that we should take a break. You're listening to us at the Caregiver Reality Hour, caregiverreality.com and WWNN 1470, and right after the break, we'll be back with more discussion with Paul and Scott.
Are you a family caregiver? Are you taking care of a spouse or loved one who can no longer take care of himself or herself? Are you dealing with Alzheimer's disease and don't know what to do? Do you feel burned out, frustrated, and just don't know where to turn? You've tried doctors, lawyers, and mental health professionals and have come to realize that they don't have practical answers to these questions. What you need are experts, non-clinical family caregivers with 25 years of active experience helping thousands of family caregivers like yourself. People who can help you provide a better quality of life for yourself and your loved one. Who you need are David Levy or Paul Vadiato. Reach David at caregiverreality.com or reach Paul at caregiverreality.com and let them help you pick the right path towards improving the quality of life for you, the caregiver, and your loved one. CFC support helps fund research, You can too. Each year, thousands of men and women serving their country in the U.S. military, as well as other employees of the federal government and the U.S. Postal Service, provide support for medical research to find treatments and cures for diseases. This is done through the Combined Federal Campaign, an annual workplace giving campaign that allows eligible individuals to support charities, such as those that conduct medical research, through a payroll deduction. Money donated this way to the medical research charities and its member organizations helps fund research to fight diseases from Alzheimer's to cancer, multiple sclerosis, blindness, breathing disorders, and much more. The diseases included afflict people of all ages, from the very young to the very old. You don't need to be a member of the military or a federal government employee to support research to help you or those you love that are suffering from an illness or disease. Donations to our not-for-profit tax-exempt organizations are tax-deductible and provide a vital source of funding in the fight to defeat some of life's most dreaded diseases. Please visit the website of the Medical Research Charities, which can be found at medicalresearchcharities.org. That's all one word, medicalresearchcharities.org. On that website, you can learn more about our member charities and make a donation in support of the research they're conducting for a specific disease or family of diseases. You can make a donation to Medical Research Charities itself and support the work of all our member charities. Please visit our website today, medicalresearchcharities.org. Become a part of Joining Forces to Find a Cure.
My name is Paul, and I am a spousal caregiver. I am one of 50 million caregivers just here in the United States alone. I keep my wife safe. I help maintain her dignity. I help give her the best quality of life possible, and above all, I am her advocate. Yes, there are times that I get angry. I become frustrated with the system. Sometimes I feel resentment and I deal with guilt, and I know that I am not alone. When I need support, I turn to CareGiver Reality for help. My name is Paul Vadiato, and I am president of CareGiver Reality. Find us at www.caregiverreality.com. Help is a click away.
This is CareGiver Reality with gerontologist David Levy and caregiver expert Paul Vadiato, who ask you to call in and speak with him on the air toll-free at 888-565-1470. That's 888-565-1470 to share a story or important information. Now, back to today's CareGiver Reality Show.
And when Paul has a caregiver problem and he clicks on Caregiver Reality, he gets me. And I've taught him everything that he knows. No, not true. Paul's very expert, but the point I think that he's making is that when you're the caregiver, I don't care how much you know. When you have an emotional issue, when you have an emotional dog in that fight,
you're not,
you don't have the perspective to do things clearly, and I know it from my spousal caregiving, and certainly, Paul, you know it from yours. During the break, you heard our commercial from MRC, Medical Research Charities, who we are now linked to and are doing and have become their caregiver arm, as it were. Medical Research Charities, as I've told you, is the umbrella organization for probably 25 to 30 research organizations in various clinical fields, heart, cancer, lung, you name it, there's a medical research scenario going on. And we have one right here in Florida over and above Scripps, and it's called the Vaccine and Gene Therapy Institute of Florida. And they're out of Port St. Lucie, and they're a nonprofit biomedical research company committed to defeating cancer and other infectious diseases through the development of novel immune-based therapies, which is what we were just talking about a couple of minutes ago. For example, just recently, their head of cancer research reported outstanding clinical data for new personalized cancer vaccine targeting both ovarian and breast cancer. More importantly, they just announced in the last week or so that they have a joint mission in research with the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm. And for those of you that don't know who the Karolinska Institute is, they are a very, very famous organization, have been doing research for a long time, and they are the people that actually picked the Nobel Prize winners in physiology and medicine every year. And together they have created something called the Center for Diseases of Aging, and they're going to be targeting the prevention and treatment of a broad range of diseases commonly associated with aging, including cardiovascular and neurodegenerative, such as temporal frontal lobe, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and the like. This is a phenomenal organization, and if you, as part of the aging world, can see a benefit in a collaboration like this, then I suggest that you go to www.vgtfl.org. That's vgtfl.org. And you can also make a donation through medicalresearchcharities.org. Either way, it'll get there. And so anyway, let's get back to what we were discussing. Scott's here, Scott Greenberg, President, CEO of Comfort Care, one of the best home health care agencies around, and he's in the Palm Beaches and in Martin County. And we were just discussing at the break that there have been some changes that are coming about and some new rules that occurred in California. Maybe you want to discuss them and what you think the impact will be on caregiving.
Yeah, when we're talking about the professional caregiver, the paid caregiver, as opposed to the family caregiver, I just want to take a moment first. I didn't thank you both for inviting me tonight, so I want to thank you that. And then secondly, I want to thank you both for what you do. You really give out invaluable information, and I know a lot of people are your fans, but you need more. And so for those of you who are listening, tell your friends, because this is a show you should listen to more frequently.
Thank you.
But so there are a couple of things that are happening. Today, for example, and it's all over the news, Seattle changed their minimum wage to $15, I think, $15.30 or whatever the number is. And franchises, I happen to be a franchise, but franchises are considered large companies, so they will be forced to institute a larger payroll sooner than smaller family-owned businesses. California has led the way in the United States to do away with the overtime exemption for caregivers. I'll explain that in a minute. And federally, that's going to happen across the country on January 1st. So what we are doing, and I don't think there's anybody that doesn't think people should make as much money as they can or should, and nobody wants to take advantage of people making less money. But for instance, here in Florida, which I know more about than I do other parts of the world, I pay well above the minimum wage, substantially above the minimum wage, because market forces drive that. But the truth is, if I take, for example, the overtime exemption, let's address that for a minute. If I take the overtime exemption, that means any caregiver who works more than 40 hours in a family's home will now have to be paid time and a half for every hour above 40 hours. Now apply that to a live-in caregiver and start to do the math on that. Who's going to pay the tally on what that is going to cost? Take a situation, which I have a number of them, where a caregiver works 10 hours a day. And don't misunderstand me, caregiving is a very difficult job. Your whole show is built around how difficult that job is. But caregiving, if I pay $10 an hour and they're working 10 hours a day for 6 days a week, they're making about $30,000 a year. I'm not saying it's a lot of money, but it's well above the minimum wage. Well, next year, that's going to cost somewhere in the ballpark of $40,000 in their wages, and that has to be passed on to the family. And who's going to pay that? Long-term care insurance will say, go get another caregiver. Stop her at 40 hours and go get another caregiver, or him. Go get another caregiver. So you're going to be introducing more complexity, more scheduling issues, more caregivers. And as you know, particularly in the area of Alzheimer's, where change is very complex, stability is welcome, change is not, we're going to be adding a level of complexity to keep control of costs that I think people don't understand. I actually talked to an attorney at the AARP. I was a speaker at the American Society of Aging conference a couple of years ago, and I sat down next, by chance, to an attorney from AARP who supported the abolition of the overtime exemption. And I said to her, who's going to pay for this? And her answer was, well, we did an analysis, and Medicare was only going to pay 0.04%. Well, frankly, Medicare won't pay any of this because Medicare does not cover the cost of long-term in-home care.
Right. Just the immediate post. post-acute.
Right. And they don't do for personal care. They only do it for
clinical
PT,
care.
OT,
Right.
physical therapy, speech therapy, occupational therapy, wound care, etc. So she said, well, we need to attract a higher level of caregiver to the industry. Well, who could argue that? Of course, that's true. I said, well, that's true, we do. Who's going to pay for it? She said, well, I just know that we need more caregivers and we need better caregivers, and the only way to do that is to pay them more money. Well, it's kind of hard to argue that premise. Who's going to pay for it? And and to the point where I said long-term care insurance won't pay for it. Families are running out of money as it is now. We're living longer but not healthier. People don't want to do that.
There are other needs against that money.
Right. So you're going to drive either more complexity to the scheduling, introduce more caregivers to the scenario, or drive people to the underground. You're going to drive people to the underground. You're going to drive them to the Craigslist that we were talking about on the break. You're going to drive them to pick caregivers that they know little or nothing about, who have no supervision, who they have no control over, no protection if they call off. You're going to take the very people you're trying to help, which are the seniors, and you're going to drive them into the hands of the predators. You just are. That's just the way life is, the way you're doing it.
You know, the analogy, Scott, I don't mean
No,
to
it's okay.
interrupt you, but you have to pick a caregiver for your mother, your spouse, grandma, with the same care that you would if you were hiring a full-time nanny to take care of your 2-year-old. And I think people kind of forget, because we're dealing with adults in terms of those in-home care situations,
Right.
that dad can look out for himself or grandma will be okay. But the more we hear about predatory practices from people who have, as you said, not only very little training, but don't always have the highest level of scruples, morals, etc. All right, and so they get in a house, and I'm not casting the world with this aspersion, but I think you have to be very aware that when you let somebody into your house with somebody who's vulnerable, and all of a sudden things that you had around, I heard a story the other day of somebody that was in that had a very difficult back surgery. Older person slipped and fell, and so there was a lot of pain medication around. They were looking for help, all right, and they hired not from an established agency, but word of mouth of somebody who said, you can get this person for X. And while they did get that person for X for 2 days, after 2 days they left, and there was no more pain medication in the med box, because that person had left with it. Now you can take that to whatever level you want, whether it's grandma's diamond ring or your husband's small collection of whatever. And I'm not branding everybody as the thief, but there are too many opportune situations if you don't know who's coming into your home. And I think that that's one of the reasons why, above anything else, when I send a client to you, Scott, and to Comfort Care, I have the comfort that not only is the care going to be good, but that you've vetted them, you've done the due diligence, and you are standing behind the people that you put in the house with your credibility as well. And I don't think that people can brush that off lightly, because it's like everything else in caregiving. It's not quite like hiring a homemaker, all right? Even though they may do certain things for you, you can't just assume that they're going to take out the dust mop and do what has to be done. These are people responsible for medication, or at least observing it, for making sure that the patient is safe, that they have followed whatever regimens that they have to. And it's not an easy job. These are professionals, and you referred to them as professional caregivers. And so we can understand why they ought to be paid a good living wage, but then you also posed a very interesting question. Who's going to pay for it?
And that issue, and there are so many sides to this issue. I mean, you could do 6 shows on this, but
Okay.
I think, look, let's face it, in the caregiver community, the overwhelming majority of professional caregivers care passionately about doing the work, but they are doing difficult work. They are doing challenging work and unrewarding work very often. please and thank you goes a very long way from family members, but because they're doing things that others don't do. But also the other side of that is that these are people who typically come from a lower economic background, and they're going into homes that typically are from an upper middle class or above background if they're paying for private care, all right? And they see an awful lot, and there's a lot of wealth and accumulation of things, and there's nobody around, and things happen. It's sometimes. Now, do I think that happens often? It happens more often than it should. It doesn't happen as often as everybody thinks. Trust me, when there's a caregiver in the house and anything's missing, the caregiver took it. It doesn't matter whether they did or not. But that's another. So that's real. I equate it. You were talking about a nanny and other things. I'm even more basic than that. You wouldn't let a plumber in your house unless they were licensed, bonded, insured, checked out. However you vet them, you wouldn't let a plumber in your house, and yet oftentimes you will pay less for a caregiver who you got either by personal recommendation or off of Craigslist than you would your dog walker.
Right.
And that's for your mother and father. Right. So I don't mean, I just think, but the other side is there are limited resources and people have to make tough choices, and
right.
that's not.
And when the plumber
tough.
comes in the house, typically it's because you got a bad leak, you got a crisis on your hands.
Right, and you're there with them.
And when we take a look at organizations such as yours and the people that you have, they're not going in for a firefight, so to speak, or because the drain is flooding the kitchen. They're going in for a longer term to provide safety, calm, schedule, the redundancies, especially, as you said, with things like Alzheimer's. You've seen one, but we do know that socialization, that structure, and a lot of other things that a paid caregiver may be able to bring into the house that the unpaid family caregiver may not recognize goes a long, long way. I mean, a number of years ago, a very famous researcher by the name of Charlack, determined that an educated caregiver, irrespective of whether it was paid or unpaid, is able to keep a loved one with dementia at home an extra year and a half. That's a year and a half that you don't have to necessarily look for an assisted living facility, dementia, or a nursing home. That's a lot of money, both on the federal side and the personal side. So that's a lot to be said for having an educated person under the roof, not necessarily from a formal education, but from a caregiver education.
Scott, if you would please, there are a lot of technical terms that are thrown around when we talk about bringing in professional help. We hear the words registry, we hear the words agency, we hear the word aide, certified nursing assistant, a lot of words that seem to go interchangeably. Can you differentiate, if you would please, the agency versus the registry, and also the difference between an aide and a certified nursing assistant?
Okay. So I'll start with the second first.
Sure.
CNA, Certified Nursing Assistant, Home Health Aide, and in parts of the country, PCA, Personal Care Assistant. So typically a CNA or a PCA in other parts of the country, not in Florida, CNA has more training and has the ability to do more things, particularly under the supervision of nursing oversight. But in-home care, in-home personal care, while there are differences, they are virtually synonymous in terms of taking care of somebody in their home for their activities of daily living. Now, in a hospital, a CNA can administer medication under nurse's supervision, but an home health aide, HHA, could not do that.
Let me hold you for a minute. Activities of daily living?
Bathing, dressing, transportation, meal preparation, medication reminders.
The basic things that help to keep you independent.
Precisely. So a home health aide can do all of those things, and a CNA can do all of those things. When you move into an independent, into an assisted living community, or into a hospital, or into a nursing home, there are things that CNAs can do under nursing supervision that HHAs, home health aides, cannot do. Now, as it relates to registries and agencies, and I often get some grief for talking about this because it does sound at times self-serving because we're a home health agency.
This is for educational purposes.
For educational purposes. So when in the state of Florida, and true in most states, but not all, in the state of Florida, in home health agency, non-medical home health agency, the person who works for that home health agency is an employee of that agency. They may be per diem, but they are an employee. Therefore, their taxes are taken out. They're covered typically by workers' compensation insurance, and that's important because if the client falls, that's terrible, but if the caregiver falls and their back goes out, that's really interesting.
Now you got a whole other issue.
So workers' compensation, supplemental liability insurance. I am not talking about quality of care. I want to be clear about that. There are young ladies that work for, and men that work for me on Monday and Tuesday and may work for registry on Wednesday and Thursday. It's
Now
not quality of
explain
care.
the registry.
Registry, they are independent contractors, 1099 employees. At the end of the day, the family is responsible for scheduling, is responsible for training. A registry cannot train their caregivers. We control, we train, for example, we do in Alzheimer's and dementia training, cognitive stimulation and behavior modification training. We do that once a month in our office for our caregivers. Trained over 120 caregivers in the last 4 months. But a registry can't do that. But assuming that the caregiver is trained, the care may be just as good from a registry, but a registry does not employ that caregiver. So if the registry doesn't employ that caregiver, who does? Well, they're independent contractors. A registry will tell you that the family is not the employer, but when I look at it, it's pretty clear to me. Right? It's not them. It's got to be you.
Right.
Know? So,
So in other words, a registry is really kind of a collection of people that have qualifications such as HHA, CNA, PCA, you know.
they're a referral source, David.
And so when you call up a registry and you say, I need somebody, they go and pick somebody from the list that they have or the group that they have. But beyond that, that's all they do. They're a middleman, as it were, all right?
If you, in the state of Florida, if you read carefully, you look at the ads for registries versus agencies, and you can tell because we're all supposed to have our license number in ads. If it starts with NR, it's a nurse registry. If it starts with HHA, it's a home health agency. When it says a nurse registry, it always says we refer caregivers. They are a referral agency. Again, I don't want to complain about quality of care because quality of care may be good. It's not the issue. But it's who is ultimately responsible when things don't go right.
And on that point, Scott, what protections exist there in terms of background checks so that when these people are coming in, there is some sort of an understanding of what they are, that, you know, they're not felons, for example?
So in the state of Florida, again, if you work for either a registry or an agency, they're all fingerprinted and background check level 2. But I will tell you that is not sufficient. I know because you can be a convicted criminal in the state of Florida and still be eligible to work from our governing agency. You know, I know we, for example, go through an additional vetting process. We check arrest record sites. In the state of Florida, if you're arrested for a felony but plea to a misdemeanor and it's under $5,000 in whatever damages, theft, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't want to misspeak that, but you can still be eligible to work. So you can have a history and still be eligible, and that's true for anybody. But in the state of Florida, everybody's fingerprinted and goes through ACA, which is the Agency for Healthcare Administration, and they tell us whether we can or cannot hire them. Now today, I do social media background checks. We go on their Facebook page and we look at that. We check their LinkedIn pages if it exists, and we do arrest record site checks. And even then, you know, it's not perfect. I know what people should ask for. I write a chapter in my book called CareGiver Roulette. Somebody always gets on the phone and says, send me your best caregiver. And I go, oh, thank God you called. She's been waiting. All right. She has to go to the bathroom so bad and she can't get off until somebody asks for her. So that's really the wrong question. Don't send me your best caregiver. How do you hire your caregivers? What do you do? What's the process you go through? All right. Beware the 70-step hiring process. 70 steps from the parking lot to the front door. If you navigate it, you're hired. Find out what they do. Find out what process they bring to the table. Find out if they're doing, in addition to background checks, other things. Find out if they're testing them. Find out if they're challenging them on their skills. Those are the things that matter. A good agency should tell you that every one of my caregivers is somebody that I would send into your house. And if they can't tell you that, go to another agency.
Scott, one second. I want you to repeat the name of the book, because a lot of people now are going to want to know, and you can get it on Kindle. Right?
You can get it on Amazon. I'm not sure about Kindle. You can get it on Amazon.
On Amazon for your
all right.
Kindle.
And it is, oh my God, I'm getting older, and so is my mom. It's available there. It's available on my website, and it's available on the Oh my God, I'm getting older, so is my mom website.
Okay. And I just want to make mention that my book, Family Caregiver Practical Problem Solving Manual, is available on my website, caregiverreality.com, and is also available at Kindle, on Amazon rather. Just go David Levy, Levy, caregiving, and it pops up. I'm sorry, Scott.
No,
but,
you're right.
As authors. Paul, what have you written lately?
I think I've been writing a lot of checks lately, yeah.
Right. And if somebody wants to get a hold of Comfort Care, and what's the main number?
You can call us 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 561-630-1620. And my cell phone, 561-630-1620. If you want to bypass that and call me, I don't answer it 24 hours a day, but I answer it a lot. My cell phone is 561-706-5157.
Well, there you have it. There's nobody that puts themselves out there quite the way you do, Scott, as I usually give my caregivers your cell phone and tell them, at least at dinner time, wait, unless it's a dire emergency, in which case you've been very gracious about picking up the phone and doing what you have to do.
Scott, one of the things I so greatly appreciate you is you tell the hard truth.
Thank you.
And sometimes families don't want to hear that.
If you want to hear what you want to hear, I'm the wrong person. If you want to hear the truth, give me a shout.
All right,
Thank
well, you've been listening to the Caregiver Reality Hour with Paul Vattiato, David Levy, and Scott Greenberg from Comfort Care has been our host, our guest. And it's been a very interesting hour. We'll be back next Tuesday at drive time. We have another Scott as a guest, Scott Solkoff, one of the finest elder law attorneys, who will not be preaching but doing a little teaching and bringing you up to date on some of the things that are going on behind the scenes, just as Scott Greenberg has, about minimum wage, overtime, etc., and the predicament that's coming. So I want to thank you all. South Florida, America, and the world, have a good one. We'll see you next Tuesday.
Caregivers, take care of yourself. We'll see you next week.
Thanks for joining us for this week's Caregiver Reality Show. Each week, David Levy, a gerontologist, and Paul Vattiato, a caregiver expert with a combined over 25 years of experience, providing practical and realistic help to caregivers struggling to keep up with the needs of a loved one who are unable to care for himself or herself. To reach David Levy, email him at david@caregiverreality.com. Or to reach Paul Vattiato, email paul@caregiverreality.com. And find out more online. Just go to caregiverreality.com. See you next week for another exciting show of Caregiver Reality. The opinions expressed on the preceding sponsored program were strictly those of its hosts, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of this station, its staff,